Hello everyone, my name is Princess Joan, the chair of the International Law Commission in GLANS. For the first module today, we'll go through an introduction to ILC, what ILC is and what it entails. So what is ILC? ILC stands for the International Law Commission. It is established in Article 13(1)(a) of the UN Charter. So what is the main purpose of the ILC? Its main purpose is to encourage the progressive development of international law as well as its codification. Those are essentially the two main functions of the ILC. When we're talking about progressive development of international law, we're referring to preparation of draft conventions in areas and situations that have not yet been regulated by international law. When we talk about codification, we are looking at laws that already exist, and we're looking at how can we unify the different laws that talk about the same problem such that there is only one universal law addressing that specific issue. When we look at codification again, codification is done through preparation of ILC principles, conclusions, articles, guidelines, or conventions. So what do those terms mean? When we're looking at the ILC principles, think of them as foundational rules. They are high-level statements that summarize the legal truths that are established. So they are not random ideas, but rather they are often pulled from historical court cases. Think of it as your school's core values, like integrity or respect. The core values serve as a base for all the rules that the school established. Those are the ILC principles now. So when we look at conclusions, they are official research summaries. So when the ILC are studying a topic, they release conclusions to explain what the current international law actually is. So this serves as a guidebook to the countries for them to understand the existing customs and existing laws that are there so that we don't have misunderstandings. So look at it as a summary in like the end of a history chapter that clarifies exactly what happened in that history and clarifies the current situation that you're in. So what are draft articles or articles? They are the proposed laws. So when the ILC wants to create a new set of rules for the world to follow, they'll write them down in a numbered list and call them draft articles. So they are formal and written with the hope that countries will eventually turn them into a real treaty. For the guidelines, guidelines are best practice advice. So they are less formal than articles. Instead of saying you have to do this, because that is what the draft articles say, or that is what the draft articles propose, the guidelines say here is the best way to handle this specific type of situation. They provide some practical steps for countries to follow without it being a strict mandatory law. So for example, look at it as a suggested study tip that a teacher will give you in class. It's not mandatory for you to follow the study tip that the teacher has given, but if you do decide to follow it, things will go much smoother for you. Finally, we have an international convention. So this is a final contract. So a convention, which is also called a treaty, is a formal written agreement between countries. So once a country signs and ratifies a convention, they are legally bound to follow it. So many of the ILC draft articles that we spoke about before become conventions after countries vote on them. So what will happen in the International Law Commission simulation in GLANS? We will have the formulation of draft articles as well as holding plenary deliberations in public international law on matters where we feel as though they haven't been sufficiently addressed in practice. So members of the International Law Commission are referred to as commissioners. A commissioner is expected to conduct research on the selected topic and submit their draft articles prior to the plenary. In a plenary, the commissioners should state their stance on the topic based on their research. So this doesn't mean that you take a stance on whether you are proposition or opposition. it is not a debate. You simply explain your findings from the research that you've carried out and your recommendations. So each plenary is headed by a chair, a deputy chair, and a rapporteur. So what is the procedure that is done in the plenary? The procedure in the plenary is, first we have the preliminary stage, the first reading, the second reading, and the adoption stage. In the preliminary stage, we have the preparation of a background guide. A background guide is simply the topic that you're supposed to be conducting your research on. After the preparation of the guide, we also have the formulation of the draft articles. The first reading refers to where commissioners defend their draft articles. So the first reading is the first stage where you can present on your research and what your findings were on that research. The plenary is limited to commissioners who have submitted their draft articles. Therefore, if you do not submit your draft articles, you cannot speak in the plenary. You cannot speak in the first reading. The third stage is the second reading. So here, it's an informal setting. And what we have is the formation of 5 working groups, and the commissioners discuss recommendations that they've written down from their draft articles and the plenary. The discussions formulate ILC draft principles based on the guidelines provided. Alternatively, we could have each commissioner present their recommendations individually to the plenary. The decision of whether commissioners will present their recommendations individually or in working groups is dependent on the chair and the deputy chair. The last stage is the adoption stage. The draft principles are presented and then voted upon. They require a simple majority vote to pass and thereafter are adopted. So what are the primary instruments that are used in the ILC? We have the Charter of the United Nations, which was formed in 1945. We have the Statute of the International Law Commission, formed in 1947. We have international statutes or conventions that are related to the topic that the commissioner is researching on. We have international case law, and we have the United Nations resolutions. You may use other instruments such as books, journals, reports, and websites. However, these are secondary sources and strictly should only be used to supplement the primary instrument. Therefore, for example, if you're planning to use a website in your research, it should be a website that talks about something in, for example, the Charter of the United Nations. It should be used to supplement the information that is already there in the Charter and not to introduce new information. Thank you.